Hey, what's ready? Welcome back to News Dose. And, well, not only did Xbox just get a major competitor for their next generation console, but we also just got a big shakeup for the console space really across the board because Valve has officially entered the room with their own console, aka the GameCube. And this thing is extremely interesting on paper, which I'm going to explain why. But I do want to compare and contrast what they're doing and what Xbox is doing because it's very similar, albeit still very different at the same time. And that's what I want to highlight in today's video because I do think they will ultimately have different demographics, albeit with some overlap as well. Now, I'm also going to once again preach competition breeds excellence because today's news very well might have been the push that Xbox needs to make a significant change that gamers have been begging for years. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, and today will be a bit different. I am going to strictly focus on Valve's new hardware because, there's just a lot to unpack with this announcement. They announced 3 different pieces of hardware. We are going to go over all 3 of those, one being their Steam 2 controller. Now, we talked about this earlier in the week because its design leaked out a bit early, albeit it was an AI-generated image, but at the same time, I mentioned that I had some concerns about that design. I'm actually a really big fan of the original Steam controller from 10 years ago, and I've wanted an evolution for a long time because it's such a unique controller that really hasn't been replicated or improved upon. But my main concern about this new design is where the analog sticks are placed. They seem uncomfortably high just based on how it looks. But like I said before, I can also say the same thing about the Steam Deck. If you look at that device, the analog sticks also looks really high on the Steam Deck as well. But once you hold it in your hands, you don't really notice. It just feels good. So I feel like Valve has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt. If I'm being completely honest, Valve seems to understand gamers and what they want more than almost anybody else in the entire industry. And I think that's one of the reasons that they have built such an impeccable reputation. They just give gamers what they want, and they put a lot of care into their products. So if this actually turns out to be uncomfortable, I would be a bit surprised. What I will say, though, is that certain outlets have already gotten hands-on impressions with all of these different pieces of hardware, and I've already heard various different people say that it is indeed very comfortable. So that's reassuring at the very least, but it's also got a lot of tech packed into it as well. They improved its gyro controls with some new functionality, which could actually end up being the biggest game changer. Gyro is probably the closest we have to a mouse and its accuracy, for a controller. And if they can improve gyro even more, that will be significant for the people that are willing to adapt to gyro controls. Now, they also implemented some new magnetic tech for its analog sticks. Allegedly, it's even better than Hall effect sticks, which more or less means that you're not going to have to worry about stick drift, which is really nice to hear. It also, once again, has back buttons, which is kind of crazy to me because, for whatever reason, Xbox and PlayStation still haven't done that with their own standard controllers. That was actually something that I asked for leading up to the release of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series, yet here we are, and we don't have those. Valve, on the other hand, is once again showing their gamer knowledge with these extra buttons. Now, you don't have to use them if you don't like them, but they are there if you do, and to me, I think it's really nice to have that as an option. So yeah, I'm actually really excited about this controller. Out of everything that they announced today, this is the one device that I absolutely know that I want without a doubt. Again, I like the original Steam controller from 10 years ago, and this really just seems to be an evolution for that pretty much across the board. Now, they also announced a new VR headset, which they're calling the Steam Frame, and I'll be honest, I'm not really interested in this. I already have multiple VR headsets, and I'm not really thrilled with the evolution of virtual reality games up to this point. I thought they had some momentum last generation. There was definitely some good AAA-like games for it, but I haven't really seen enough advancement these past few years to invest in yet another VR headset. However, I will say what they're doing is pretty cool for anybody who is looking for a VR headset, and that's because this seems to be a direct competitor to the MetaQuest. You know, the thing about the MetaQuest is that it's a standalone device. And that's always been its big selling point compared to the competition. You know, you don't need to plug it into an external device. It's its own console. And they're doing something very similar with the Steam Frame. Not only can it stream games, but they also said that the Steam Frame is a PC and runs SteamOS powered by a Snapdragon 8 series processor. With 16 gigabytes of RAM, Steam Frame supports standalone play on a growing number of both VR and non-VR games without needing to stream from your PC. So, I mean, we'll see how this headset turns out. I'm sure it will be another good option to have. But for me, I just need to see more big-time games to sell me on it. That's all I'm saying. Now, you know, if they make Half-Life Alyx 2, then hey, you know, they might get me, but we'll see. The big news, though, is their new Steam Machine, aka the GabeCube. This thing either looks like an Xbox Series X chopped in half or a Nintendo GameCube, you know, depending on how you view it. And I mean, I just like the way that it looks. It's small, which is not something that I can say about other modern day consoles, and you can even customize it. If you want, you can take off the faceplate and replace it. They did show us a couple options, so that's really going to open up a market of its own. And then spec-wise, it sounds very capable. According to Valve, it's 6 times as powerful as the Steam Deck, and here's where I want to go ahead and pump the brakes just a bit. In terms of its specs, it's got a really good CPU. But there are still questions about its VRAM and its graphics card. The VRAM is only 8 gigabytes, which is a bit lower than the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. Now, Valve still seems very confident with just 8 gigabytes, though, and Digital Foundry seems to be at least giving them the benefit of the doubt, which is something that I said earlier as well. However, I do want to see it in action because, you know, on paper, it kind of seems like it's going to be more powerful than the Xbox Series S, but it's also not going to be as powerful as the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And, you know, I do want to see how it holds up with some of today's AAA games. Valve, though, is targeting up to 4K 60 FPS with FSR. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean every game will be able to achieve that, but it can reach up to those targets depending on the individual game. Now, this does take me to the next topic because I do want to talk about the Steam Machine versus the next generation Xbox, because this is already quickly becoming a narrative online. You know, it's hard not to notice the similarities between today's announcement and Xbox's next generation console and everything that's rumored for it. Now, for my followers, you all have heard me say this before, but I do think the Valve is a more direct competitor to the next Xbox than the PlayStation 6. And this here is the exact reason. If you really look at it, Xbox's entire strategy, it mimics what Steam has been doing for years with the Steam Deck, and that's not by accident. Xbox clearly likes what Valve is doing, and they're trying to do the same thing, but with Windows and potentially an Xbox OS. So this new Steam Machine, it's taking that idea and it's bringing it to the console PC hybrid market. However, with today's news, there has been this emerging narrative. Well, why buy the next Xbox? Valve has already beaten them to the punch with their own PC console hybrid. And I do think there is some merit behind that question, because there is some overlap between the two. There's no doubt about that. But there's also, I think, some oversights to that assumption as well. So let me just kind of put it this way. To me, this is no different than the Steam Deck versus the ROG Ally X. They are similar, but they do still target different prices, and they do have different operating systems, and they do target different power levels. Now, to be fair, we still haven't heard the price tag for either the next Xbox or the new Steam Machine, but based on what we've heard and kind of just based on prior knowledge, I do believe the Steam Machine will be a much more affordable option, albeit much less powerful in return. So in other words, I think for people who want an ultra premium console that can display the best possible graphics, that's where the next Xbox will come into play. Also, just depending on how backwards compatibility works for the next Xbox, I mean, it could potentially run games all the way back to the OG Xbox, whereas the Steam machine won't be able to run those games out of the box. Now, outside of that, though, they will essentially, for the most part, be able to play all of the same games, because you do have to remember, Xbox puts all of their games onto Steam day one. So for consumers, it's really just going to come down to price, power, and which OS or even ecosystem you prefer. I mean, if you're in the Xbox ecosystem and if you have a big Xbox library, then you might want to go with the next Xbox. Now, if you have a big Steam library, again, you might want to go with the Steam machine. Again, there's definitely some overlap, but there are enough differences that I still think that both can live comfortably next to each other. There is one thing that I want to mention, though, because as of today, the Steam machine has one massive advantage over really both Xbox and PlayStation, and that's that it doesn't have paid online. You don't have to subscribe to anything to play games like Battlefield 6 and Arc Raiders online with your friends. It's free. And I'll tell you this right now, because Xbox's strategy is so similar to Valve's, they absolutely have to get rid of their online paid subscriptions, or that will impact how many people are willing to buy into their next console. I mean, I am pretty certain that has to change, especially if they want to grab the attention of PC gamers specifically. And that's why I always root for competition. It's these type of things that benefits consumers. Valve very well could force their hand to remove paid online. Now, of course, we'll see what happens, but what I will say is that I am interested in the Steam machine. I mean, I still need to see the price and its benchmarks for various different games, but I do have a pretty large Steam library. I love the Steam ecosystem. I think it's among the best storefronts, just with all of the different deals and how they implement all of these different features. And I also just like the idea of emulation on the Steam machine. In fact, I was actually playing Metroid Prime 3 on the Steam Deck just earlier today, and that's really one of the best things about the Steam Deck, in my opinion. It's an emulation powerhouse for a handheld, and because you can add emulated games to your Steam library almost seamlessly, it's just another great thing about SteamOS. So I do like the idea of the Steam machine on paper. But yeah, as we learn more, of course, I'll keep you updated. In the meantime, though, do give me your thoughts in the comments below. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.